Thank you. Before we get started, I wanted to do mention that I'm connecting to you today from my home just south of Toledo, and I actually live 2 miles from the site of the Battle of Fallen Timbers, which in 1794 was a major defeat of Confederated Native nations. And this was followed by the Treaty of Greenville, which opened Ohio to European settlers. And I live 1 mile from where the Treaty of 1817 was signed at Fort Meigs. This treaty stripped 5 million acres of land from all Native American tribes and nations in Ohio, and currently there are no federally recognized tribal lands in Ohio today. If you'd like to learn more, I recommend the book here, The Other Trail of Tears, for some thoroughly depressing reading, but it's good to be mindful of how we come to be where we are today. So back to what you came here for. I have a PhD in entomology, and I've worked in education for decades, both formally and informal. I also have sort of a secondary career. Some people call it my Batman career. Um, I moonlight as a science writer, and I've worked for Wires. I currently do a lot of work for Highlights for Kids. I've also written for Washington Post, Science, and several other outlets. So I've been doing a lot of science communicating for a while, and it's been a lot of fun. I want to point out that is not a mustache, that is a tarantula. Uh, she's one of our curly hairs. When I was at Purdue, I had the privilege of managing a bug zoo, and it was super fun. And one of the things that's new is AI. And we have computers, right, in our pockets that give us access to almost all of human knowledge immediately. And somehow we are not smarter than ever. Uh, we are drowning in a tsunami of misinformation and robot generated AI gibberish. If you weren't sure, these are not spotted lanternflies. I'm not even sure they're really insects. Um, so that's an important invasive pest. And because it's so difficult to know what's real and what's fake right now, a lot of people are not getting great information. But people believing things that aren't right is not an AI problem exclusively. And it's not really an internet problem. It's a people problem. People have always believed things that aren't true, and just telling them you're wrong is not very effective. And this is one of my favorite examples of people who um, make mistakes that really don't have anything to do with science communication. One of the things that we talk about a lot is an information deficit. That lack of knowledge can be fixed by just giving people facts. And sometimes even having the knowledge is not helpful. This guy was gassing up his car at a gas station and he saw a spider next to his gas tank. So he immediately thought, kill it with fire, and whipped out his lighter with the predictable results that you can see in this picture. And look, the gas station has clearly posted flammable signs everywhere. He knows gasoline is flammable. I cannot believe that you get to an age where you can drive a car and you don't know that gasoline explodes. So his problem was not lack of knowledge, it was an excess of emotions. And he was being driven by his fear of the spider, not his cognitive knowledge that gasoline goes kablooey. And this idea of an information deficit is also sometimes called the poof model. You give people new information and poof, they learn something. And that would be awesome if we were Vulcans, but we are not. We do not make fully informed decisions based entirely, just on facts. If factual information was convincing, everybody would love insects and understand their role in nature. And they would also be fully vaccinated. And you will hear me talk about vaccination as well as climate change in this talk because both disciplines have produced a huge body of research on how to talk to people about science that may be controversial. And I'm not going to show you images from problematic online discourse or debates about vaccines and climate change, or frankly, anything. Because you've experienced reality, you have seen all of the things that can happen. But people have reasons for the choices that they make, whether that is trolling on the internet or skipping a measles shot. And accepting those reasons and not just yelling, "You're wrong," at each other is how we move towards having a conversation. Because if all we do is, "You're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong," we're basically just cicadas screaming at each other, which is not super effective. And here's my obligatory Taylor Swift reference. Um, the problem is that when people are wrong, it's really hard not to want to argue. But arguing makes it worse. They will be less likely to want to have a conversation with us. And by focusing on fact acceptance as a goal, we're going to miss opportunities to talk to people who don't accept the same facts that we do. And that, again, is very frustrating. Being human is hard. And we're the problem. It's us, right? It's our brains. I changed that when I didn't want to say it's the problem, it's me, because it is not personally my problem, but you get the idea. And so our brains are, we're in this meat suit body, right? That's operating on evolutionary hardware that is millions of years old. Our brain software is from the Paleolithic. And emotions and feelings are the most important thing about learning and memory. You can think of emotions as the read-write command to the hard drive in our brain. And we're also very sensitive to the beliefs and actions of people who are around us, because cooperation and getting along have been really key to our evolutionary success as humans. And because we are social animals that run on emotion and group dynamics, everything that we do is interpreted through emotions. So even when we are discussing facts or scientific data, we are not just doing that. Our emotions are in there, it's in the mix. So we are never just having a conversation about insects. And one of the other things that we inherited is that social interactions are how we validate information. And friends and family are key. What our social group believes influences what we believe. And since it was just recently the holidays, how many of you had very uncomfortable conversations with friends or family about political or science issues? Right? And here's the other question: how many of you actively avoided having those conversations? Because we avoid conflict. And that also leads us to avoid conflicting information. And the fancy name for this is identity protective cognition. And information is true and it's good because it doesn't conflict with what I already believe. And it fits with what my community believes and what my family believes. And that also means that we will avoid consuming content online or other places that makes us uncomfortable, because conflict is uncomfortable. And as a person that goes out and talks to people, I'm a stranger. And so when a stranger shows up to a group and says, "Hi, I'm an expert," and I tell them a bunch of stuff that doesn't match what they already believe or things that they know because their parents told them, I'm pretty suspect. They have no reason to really listen to me. And next on our list of reasons why our brains are the problem is heuristics. And we rely heavily on mental shortcuts, heuristics. Because honestly, think about how many decisions you have to make in a day. I mean, those decisions start with, do I care that my socks don't match? Um, and are sometimes bigger, like, do I get this done before I have to leave for work? Um, we do not have time to sit down and deeply think about every single decision that we make. And so we have a lot of shortcuts. And one of the classic examples that I use as a heuristic is this cartoon of a bee. If you ask someone to draw a bee, right, you're going to get something that looks like this. It is black and yellow stripy. It has a pointy end where there's a stinger. It has antennae, and it likes flowers. That's a bee. And it should not be petted, right? Because bee. So if you've read news stories in which what you actually have is a fly, so this fly here, this is a syrphid fly, which is a mimic of bees. That happens a lot. It happens a lot, and it's something that a lot of I and my entomology friends like to be like, they've got it wrong again. But it totally makes sense that people think these are bees because look, if you have a bee flying towards you, or what you think is a bee, no regular person has time to go, does that have halt ears? How many pairs of wings does that have? Right? Nobody's going to do that. They're just going to be like, I should probably give that one some space. And so using these shortcuts makes a lot of sense, but it also means that we don't give things a lot of thought when maybe to. And as we have had, our digital world has made time and attention the real deficit, not information, because we are constantly being bombarded with, texts and emails and alerts. And some of you probably have already gotten uh, something popping up on your phone just while you've been sitting in here. And so mental shortcuts are all that we run on right now because we're never doing just one thing. And next in my list of things to be mad at your brain about, repetition. So when things are repeated, we remember them. And that's a very important adaptation. It lets us do tasks more quickly. For early humans, it let them remember where the big scary animals lived. And writing is relatively new in human history. We've only had writing for about the last 5,000 years. It's very new. And so repeating information and preferentially remembering it is how you can transmit important information across generations. And that's great until the internet and cable started repeating things over and over and over and over and over. And Friends is my example. So things are repeated all the time. Some of you probably can look at this, and if I ask you what the theme song is to this, you can probably start it up in your head, and I'm very sorry if I have now given you an earworm. And that's benign when it's just sitcom jingles, but incorrect science information is repeated all the time, sometimes by people who are very well known. And when it is repeated a lot over and over and over, we remember it. And we also know from research that the more things are repeated, the more they are truthy, or the more credibility that they have. So even though you might know, the first time you hear something, you'll be like, I don't know. If you keep hearing it over time, it's going to become more credible. And so that's how we get into situations like this. This was sent to me recently, where people have been talking about the dangers of 5G and Wi-Fi for many, many years now, decades, really. There's not a lot of evidence for this. I mean, the papers that I have seen are extremely weak. And overall, there's no consensus, and there just doesn't seem to be much evidence for this. We've also been hearing for the last decade or so, bees are dying, bees are dying, bees are going extinct. And so it totally makes sense that somebody would put those together into a new theory, that it's 5G killing the bees. And if I want to talk to somebody about this and I start the conversation with, you're wrong, everything about this is wrong. That is also effectively ending the conversation. It's not going to work. And the reason for that is our brains respond much, much better to emotions than to facts. And if I tell someone that they are wrong, they will not feel good. And again, remember, our emotions are directly connected to our memory. If I don't make them feel good, they're not going to listen to me. And so a better way to deal with this is to redirect the conversation and to say, wow, I see from this that you are actually really interested in bee conservation. That is awesome. For me personally, what I've found is that habitat loss and pesticides are really a bigger threat. Would you like to know more about that? And again, I'm letting go of the fact part and moving towards the conversation. And let me give you some better information. So, trying to keep it very, very positive. And this is related to my first big piece of advice here. Always have a goal. For any time you go out and you want to communicate something, your goal may vary from audience to audience. This is my own personal goal about most of what I do. And I want to point out that this goal is focused on having people take action, or moving them towards taking an action. Because my goal shouldn't be getting people to accept certain facts, because that probably won't happen. And they don't need to agree with my facts to take the action. The important thing is get them to the action. I also say that it's fun and positive because, again, like we just talked about, if you make things fun, people will remember it because they have positive feelings. If you make things happy, right, people will remember they had a good time talking to you. Those of you who have experienced organic chemistry directly know the relationship between fun and learning. It's not there for many organic chemistry classes, and probably for other classes that you've had. But if you think about your favorite class that you ever had, probably it was one where the teacher respected you, the teacher talked kindly to you, and the teacher made things interesting. And so recognizing that it's not about the facts, and that what we want is to get people to adopt practices can be very helpful. In terms of how you structure what you're going to do when you're communicating with people, there's a couple of different ways that these are described. And it doesn't matter if you know these terms, it doesn't matter if they appeal to you in any way. I just want to use them because they're helpful in ways to structure how we describe the interactions that we're having with an audience or people that we're talking to. And in general, education and outreach are at the top here. They are more formal. So right now, what we're doing is education because it's a thing that you do to people. I am talking, you guys are listening, and you're listening pretty passively. We will switch more to something like outreach at the end when there are questions, because then we have more of a back and forth. But it's still, you're asking me questions, right? So there's still less audience control. Interpretation and engagement are at the other end of the spectrum where the audience is really much more engaged. So interpretation and engagement are things you do with people. So that there is information going back and forth. So education and outreach, it's kind of one way. So you're having information delivered to you, but in interpretation and engagement, it's two-way. There's an exchange of information between experts and non-experts. Because honestly, we're all experts in something. None of us know everything. And so that's kind of the way you want it, that there is this information exchange. And hopefully that makes sense. And outreach is where I've spent a lot of my career. So that's kind of a one way. And this is a fun example of a program I did with when I was working at Purdue University with the Indiana Humanities Council. So these are poets and artists. And they wanted to learn about honeybees. And so we opened up a hive for them. We showed them some of the research that we're doing at the university. And they also, their leader talked a little bit about Shakespeare and his misunderstanding of how bees work. So Shakespeare thought there was a king bee, and it wasn't until Butler, a little bit later, not probably coincidentally, in the time of Queen Elizabeth, decided it's a queen bee. So this was super fun, and everybody had a great time. They all went home. They knew more about bees. Interpretation is a very different approach, and both I and Rachel are certified interpreters. Interpretation is about emotions and connections. And this is a photo from a high school program that I did at Purdue, and you can see everyone here is having an emotion in this picture. I especially enjoy the side eye in the back from the graduate mentor. And what I am holding there is this gigantic green insect. It's a jungle nymph. She is about 6 inches long. She is one of the largest insects in the world. And if this is a situation where interpretation is going to be a better approach, because I can't really start giving them information until, first of all, I make sure that they feel safe, because they've been confronted by this giant insect and they don't know anything about it. That I will not force them to do anything without their consent. So I'm not going to, stick the bug in their face, or actually, oh, that's kind of a fun 3D thing. We won't get we won't get distracted. And so I also am absolutely not going to tell them that they shouldn't feel fear or they shouldn't feel caution around a gigantic spiny insect. And as an entomologist, I have one of the hardest psychom jobs out there. I have to promote what are probably the least popular animals in the States. Pretty much every day of my outreach career, I've been told that the thing I love is disgusting, it's gross, needs to be killed, and that's not fun. And so I am trying to get people to appreciate the little things that run the world, the bugs, the spiders, the other arthropods. And I can't do that by telling people that, their feelings are wrong, because feelings are equivalent to facts to the people that have them. They have equal weight. It's not that, facts count more. Feelings are very real. And if you take nothing away from this talk, it should be that our job is to respond thoughtfully to how people feel, not to tell them what to feel. And this is frankly a life tip. If you've ever had a conversation with your partner or a friend and you said, you shouldn't be mad about that. Somebody said that to me, you shouldn't be mad about that. My response would probably be, well, I wasn't mad, but I am. Because telling people what to feel is just not helpful. And it feels like you're invalidating things that are very real to them. So having said that, what can we do? So we've talked about all the ways our brains are annoying, and that we have to deal with emotions. How do we do that? And one way to do this is to take the information that people give you. So people will give you information about their attitudes, right? So the first guy here is clearly saying, I do not like spiders. Or their attitude might be more positive. I want to use less pesticides. Intentions are usually tangled up in things that people tell you about their attitudes. I don't want to use pesticides, but there are so many mosquitoes. And so they're also telling you what's holding them back from the behavior, and the behavior is where we want to go. Being willing to let a spider live outside your house, or being, using less pesticides, and using them only in places where you absolutely need them. And thinking about the behavior we want first is also called backwards design in education. So what is the outcome that we want to see? And then once we know where we want them to go, we can take the attitudes and intentions and try and steer them along. It's a lot easier to work with attitudes and intentions than beliefs. And it doesn't really matter how they get there if they do the thing that we think would be very beneficial for them to do. And so again, we don't want to focus on fact acceptance. And not focusing on fact acceptance is sometimes a great strategy because some people are not having it. Um, and it's using what we call a culture first approach is a little easier. And so we show that we respect the values of the people that we're talking to. And to be very clear, I am not talking about values like it's okay to do unconsensual things or some people's lives are less than others. That is not okay. By values, I'm talking about people who feel like environmentalism is a bad thing, or that climate change is a hoax. And there are huge political divides right now in how people think the country should be run and how our planet should be run. And that means that a lot of topics are total non-starters if you use words that are tied to really strong feelings, like climate change and environmentalism. But you can still have those conversations. You just have to be mindful of what a particular person's beliefs are. And so when I've worked with farmers, many of them do not want to hear about climate change, but they do want to know about crop resilience to extreme weather. They want to know about fuel savings and no-till systems. Um, and that helps them move past hesitancy into action. It doesn't actually matter that they think climate change is a hoax. I don't care. I don't need them to change their beliefs. What I want them to do is to adopt practices that will help them and that will help their farms. And by letting go of being factually right, I mean, we don't have to have an argument because we've already won the argument, man. The facts are on our side. So we just let go. Just let go of being right and focus on making a connection and moving people towards actions. And some other things that you can do is, and this is, so the first one is in-group, not outsiders. One of the things that I think makes the Xerces ambassador program so successful is that it is positioning the ambassadors as part of a group. So a traditional education or outreach program is something like this, right? If we, you guys have all come here on a Thursday afternoon and you're going to sit and you're going to watch a webinar. The number of people who will do that is not large. I hate to tell you, you may be a nerd, maybe a nature nerd anyway, if you are watching this. On the other hand, the number of people who are going to show up for a farmer's market or a Rotary meeting or a plant club meeting or a science fiction convention where I've had a lot of fun doing programs for. Those people, we are going to their spaces rather than making them come to us. By going to those spaces, we position ourselves as insiders, not as an outsider. And that means we can take advantage of that as being like, look, here, I'm part of you. I have the same values as you. The second one is autonomy support. And this is a fancy name for saying something like, only you can make that decision. And I've had great luck with this because what you're doing is reminding the person that they are in control. And it also makes it feel less like you're pressuring them. I want you to dig up your entire yard and replace it with native plants. No. But saying only you can make that decision about whatever you are talking about basically kind of backs off a little bit and reminds them that they are in control of the situation. And man, who doesn't want control of more things happening in their lives? Affirmation, that is not necessarily you're good enough, you're smart enough. That's more just showing that you're listening and providing positive encouragement. So it can be something as simple as going, oh, I see. and just being really, really open to the conversation. It can be something like, that is awesome that you've started learning more about native bees. And so you're giving them some praise. And the reason for this is everything that we are as humans is built on trust, for the younger crowd vibes. Um, and if I make you feel bad or stupid or untrustworthy, like I seem like I'm untrustworthy, um, you're not going to be receptive to anything I'm saying. And so making sure that that interaction is positive is really important. And another way you can do that is paraphrasing and reflecting. So if somebody tells you something, they're asking you a question, you can say, so it sounds like you'd like to know more about what native plants are best for Lower Michigan. So that shows them you are listening, but it also gives them a chance to correct you if you haven't quite got it right. And then the feel good outcomes. And you're kind of sensing a theme here, right? Make them feel good. So it cannot be all doom and gloom. And definitely, it can feel that way sometimes. Um, if people think everything is doomed, then they have no incentive to take any action. And so, how you make people feel is just as important as what you tell them. And I like to focus on saying, you're absolutely right. There is a problem. There's some real threats to our native insects, but our research shows that there's also things that we can do that can make a difference. These are really small animals. And so the changes that we make don't need to be huge either. Little things that we individually can do can help. And if you think about if you've ever gone to your grocery store, right, you probably see those little bee boxes, which, okay, frankly, are not always great for native bees, but there's a market for that because people want to make things better. And so by telling people, yes, here's how you can do that, people want to make things better. And so giving someone something that they can do, again, this gets back to control, right? Wouldn't we all like to make things better? So this is something that combining these techniques, giving them something that they feel like they can do, that's a great way to move people to take action. This series of embarrassing photos is also from Purdue. This is me when I had a lot more hair, talking to people using one of my favorite techniques, feel, felt, found. And this is me actually talking to those undergraduate students that we saw earlier who were a little dubious of my jungle nymph. And this technique is where you basically talk about emotions first, before you get around to the facty part. And so this is me actually talking about spiders, since they were not very excited about our tarantulas, and so I'm telling them a story about the time that I had to move our refrigerator to clean behind it, and a spider landed on my neck, and I let out a sound that I'm pretty sure was higher than any little Richard has ever achieved. And that actually worked really great. They're like, "Oh, yeah, all right." Even the bug lady has her moments. And so how this would work in, let's say you're having a conversation as a Xerces ambassador, someone says, I want to have more native plants in my yard because I want to help bees, but I'm afraid that my yard will look trashy. And so you got attitudes and intentions there, right? They want to help the bees, but they're concerned. And so the way you would do this is, I totally get why you'd feel concerned about the way your yard looks if you put in native plants, because you do not want to get a citation from the city, and that affects the value of your house. And so I'm reassuring them that feeling that you have is totally normal and that is reasonable. Then the next step, I felt a little overwhelmed too when I first started working with native plants and creating bee habitats. And so here I'm creating connection. I feel similarly. I've had those same concerns. Um, and again, in group, out group, right? And so now I'm trying to move myself into I am like you. And then the found is I found a huge community of people and resources that will help. You don't have to do this on your own. And there's many published garden plants, so you don't have to invent your own. And our local county office has a native plant sale each spring, so you don't have to drop a whole bunch of cash while you're doing this. The other thing this does, so, I've told her a story. The story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And story is very important because this is the next thing about our brains. Stories are what's called a cognitively privileged pathway, which is a very fancy thing to say stories are more believable and they stick in our memory better. And we get back to, we haven't had writing for a long time. Stories are how traditionally things are transmitted. And if you have ever cried over a novel or a movie, you know that stories, even when we know the stories aren't real, the stories totally can move us to have strong emotional reactions. And we've already talked about strong emotional reactions are how people remember things. And so, how would you tell a story? Well, when I use stories, very often I talk about single solitary bees. And I tell people about solitary bees as if it is a story. So here is our solitary bee. She's basically a single mom that's working super hard trying to care for her kids. And she has to gather, she has to build a home for them. She has to gather food for them. She has to avoid predators and parasites. And so that makes it a story, as opposed to, just laying a bunch of facts on them. And so that's one way that you can, again, tap into the way that our brain is wired and use that for good. Um, so, hang on. Am I missing a slide? I am not. But now you get to see the cute stuff. We'll just leave it there. Enjoy these heuristic bees. And so, in summary, uh, you want to engage the social mind because we are social animals. And so don't just be dropping facts like they're hot. You want to have have a conversation and attend to the social aspects of what's happening. And remembering that every interaction we have, even when you're talking about bugs, it's going to have emotional components. And we can learn to make factual decisions. I mean, we're not prisoners of our brain, but because our default settings are preferences for emotions and stories and repetition, knowing those sort of default settings in our brain can help us structure the way that we deliver information to make it easier for people to understand. And for maximum learning, people should have fun. Or at least be relaxed. You can't always make it super fun, but definitely keeping things positive. And my last 2 points are advice, unsolicited, of course. Uh, you should also know when to bail, because communication is really hard work. And recognizing when you've had enough, you need a break, or that you're in a situation that is toxic, is important because you should also be having fun if you are a communicator. You will do better if you are having fun talking to people and being with people and being in a space where you can do the educational work and have those conversations. And so taking care of yourself is also really important. So that is my extremely fast, quick and dirty view of SciComm. And again, enjoy the heuristic bees, and I would love to have your questions.
Thank you. I laughed out loud a few times there.
Yay!
There's some good quotes I'm going to hold on to. Don't drop facts hard like they're hot. That was wonderful. Thank you for sharing all that knowledge and so many great tips in communication that I think can be used in so many different aspects of life. So yeah, we just have a couple questions. Just a reminder, if you have questions for Gwen, put them in the Q&A. So I'm going to start off with Aaron's question, which is great. It sounds like cognitively privileged pathways, say that 5 times fast, mean that fiction, stories and novels have a place in having a positive change, correct?
I would think so, yeah. It's if you think about, I'm trying to think of a good example, but documentaries are a good example, and definitely a lot of the interest in nature has been spurred by documentaries. The Discovery Channel before it became the commercial channel. Um, those are stories, right? And so that is one way. But also there's stories about scientists, stories about Maria Sibylla Miriam, which I hope I didn't just muckle her name, this amazing woman that traveled over the world, and that was centuries ago. And so her love for the natural world, I think, really comes across, and the things that she's willing to go through to do that. So yeah, absolutely. I think stories are very important. So everybody write a novel now.
Definitely.
No small task. Okay, couple more questions coming in. Someone else asks, do you need to be an insect expert to have these conversations with people?
I don't think so. I mean, honestly, I know an absolutely unreasonable amount of stuff about bugs. And there's I mean, really unreasonable the things that I learned. And because but many of us can become conversant on topics because we love them, right? Because they're interesting to us. And in that passion, right? Emotion, that passion will carry you over not knowing stuff. And there are many things. I mean, I get asked questions and I'm just like, I do not know, because there's a lot of insects. There's a lot of insects. I mean, I also get mailed pictures all the time, and it's like, I do not know what that is. No idea. I'm not even sure if it's alive. Um, and that's just, just admitting that you don't know something, but also you know how to find out, right? And so you can also teach how to find out to other people who may have questions. So no, I absolutely do not think being an expert, like I am not a social scientist, but I have learned over time and by spending time reading that, and then also the various training that I've had, that I've been able to come together with enough stuff to give you unsolicited advice.
We're getting some really good but hard questions. Judy wants to know, how do you begin discussing results of soil testing or chemical testing with a hostile farmer?
I mean, I think the way that I would do it would be to just start by saying, it feels kind of like you're not happy with these results. Can you tell me why? But that is also because I've been really secure in my job, and that may not be an approach that fits this particular situation. But by giving the person a chance to say, I'm not happy, right? And just saying, I'm something that you're not happy. Please tell me, how can I help? That gives them a chance to tell you what is it that they're bothering them. Or they could just say, my dog just died. And that's why they feel terrible, right? And they're not very happy. And it's really hard. And this I think gets back to the whole, like, we are super sensitive to how other people feel and act around us. And so it's absolutely common to feel like this person doesn't like me, or this person is angry. And I got to tell you, I have gotten through my entire career, I cannot tell you how many times I have gotten in my job evaluations, Gwen is always angry. And I'm like, have you met me? I'm a little round woman that likes bugs. I am not angry, ever. The only time I've ever been angry is when someone touched one of my students inappropriately. And yes, I was angry, and that was justified. So yeah, it's, I guess I have resting Vulcan face. I don't know. Um, but yeah, and so it's, when we don't know, we can't take action. And so finding out is where you start.
This seems really relevant, kind of turning the table back on your own emotions. And maybe you just answered this, but for the rest of us that maybe have a little harder time with this, how do you keep your cool and keep your blood pressure from going up when talking to people who are totally in opposition with your views?
Well, that is one of those know when to bail situations. Because there are some people who just, I don't understand it, but I have met these people, and I actually had a student that was like this. They really enjoy arguing. And sometimes they will just argue for the sake of arguing. Sometimes it's because they have their own issues and they need to feel dominant. But if it is making you uncomfortable, then that means it's time to stop. Because you have no duty to harm yourself in the course of trying to save the bees or whatever it is that you're talking about. And that is when you can say something like, I sense that you're getting really upset. And why don't we do this? Why don't you go take a little walk, or I'm going to take a little walk. And if you want to talk about it later, we can do that when we're feeling a bit better. And if they don't respond to that, then you know that these people are not okay, and you should probably leave. Because most people will recognize I'm losing my cool and I need to take a moment. And by gracefully giving them that, that also tells you, like, if they aren't willing to back off, then that's a problem.
I love this. Next question, Katie is wondering, considering limited communications budgets and resources, what are some ways you have found to scale science communications, or what have you found are the best strategies for impact? It's a big question.
Yeah, I mean, that is one of my endless frustrations, is that I think communication is one of the most important things that we do, and it is almost never funded. Or funded fully, at least. And the main way to do that is to show the impacts, like what getting that funding will buy, so to speak. And if you're able to say, and part of that also is, as you are doing this, keeping documentation. Because if you can say, last year I talked to 8,706 people, and that was an increase from the year before. And those people in our evaluation said great things. That is a lot easier to make a case for somebody giving you money than not having any of that data. The other thing is to find partners, because there are, and this is the in-group, out-group thing. The more connections that you have, the easier it's going to be to achieve your goals. And so one example of this, I mentioned science fiction conventions briefly. I really do go to science fiction conventions and talk about books. I did a panel on cicadas at DragonCon. I did talked about native bees. And so DragonCon had 80,000 people at it. I could never put a meeting together for 80,000 people. Honestly, I think my head would explode. But I had the opportunity to have an audience that big because I know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody, and that's how I got that audience. And so things like, talking to grower organizations, talking to garden clubs. I mean, basically a lot of the things that Xerces ambassadors do, right? Those are people who can help you find the resources that you might need. Hopefully, I think that answered it. If not, ask again.
Yeah, we will definitely. And if we don't get to your questions today, you can always reach out to us and we can try and answer the questions at a later time too. You can email us. Moving along though, Barbara wants to know, does the approach you described today also work with young children?
Yes. And actually in the podcast that I did before this, we talked a little bit about social emotional learning. And a caveat is it depends on how young the kid is, because the kid is really little. Then there's all emotions and not a lot else. But one of the things I do a lot with smaller kids, if you've interacted with small kids, what they really want is someone to listen. They want someone to listen to their stories, and they will tell you amazing things. And usually their parents are like, don't tell them about that. And so a lot of times just listening, and the other thing that will happen when they get to be about 10-ish, then it switches and they want you to listen to the things that they know, and they want to tell you all the things that they know about bugs. And for me, especially, I mean, I got a PhD in entomology. I don't need to know this, but they want to tell me, and I just let them tell me. And for those kids, a lot of times they don't quite get it right, and I'm not going to worry about it, because what they want is for someone to know that they know something and to listen to them again. And so then that's where you use that sort of, that's great. And did you know, right? And so you kind of try and redirect them. But honestly, for a lot of kids, what they really want is just for an adult to pay attention to them and to listen to them. And that's, if you don't have 20 kids in front of you, you can do that. It gets a lot harder when there's 20 kids in front of you. And that's where in the social emotional learning, we talked a little bit about coaching them on how they can respond. So if I have, I work a lot with live insects. And so if I walk into a room and I have a giant caterpillar in my hand, the first thing I do is I talk, I hide the caterpillar and I talk a little bit about, here's how we're going to do this, right? If you don't want to touch the caterpillar, this is what I want you to do. It's just cross your arms and be very calm. I will not make you touch the caterpillar or do it anyway. You get to choose. And so again, it's back to that, empowering them to make their own decisions, making sure that everything is consensual. And so because kids so often, their emotions are big, it really helps them to have instructions on, if you're, here's how we can manage this.
All right, next question I'm going to ask is from Michelle. She is one of our ambassadors in California. How do you feel about letting audiences ask questions as you're giving a presentation versus waiting until the end? I sometimes feel better engaging a few questions during a talk, and that might be better.
I do. Yeah, I usually do. But it also depends on the audience. So if you're talking to kids, that can get out of hand real fast. But for adults, yeah, I absolutely like having questions, because if one person has a question, multiple people have that same question. And I'm not, and again, it's when you're focused on behavior, right? And so I want to get them to adopt these practices. It doesn't really matter if I don't get around to telling them how many species of bees there are. If they get, there's a lot of bees, good enough. And so just by letting go of the fact part and focusing on the interaction part, I think you have a better experience for the audience.
That's helpful. Yeah. All right. Multiple people have a similar question. Look at that. What's a good tactic or response to the idea that bugs are gross? Or how do you approach people who are repulsed by invertebrates when trying to get them to care about their role in the ecosystem?
The one that I use is to basically say, I totally get that. I hear that from a lot of people, and that's very common. And so sort of normalize it. And what I usually say is, I think one way to think about that is your house is your space. You control what comes into your house. And so I'm not going to get concerned about if you kill anything in your house, because that's your space. But elsewhere, if you can learn to tolerate them, they actually do some really great things for us. And so it seems to work really well, because I think a lot of times I get people apologizing to me, like, I killed a bug yesterday, I'm really sorry. And it's like, you killed Fred, what? It's like, that's okay. It's okay. We all have to, accidentally or purposefully, sometimes we kill things. And little animals, sometimes it just happens. And so by giving people that permission, like, say, no, it's totally reasonable if you want to keep things out of your house. And I totally get that that's a concern. So it's kind of like saying, like, this thing, go for it. But outside, the spiders are catching mosquitoes. The wasps are catching are predators. Fireflies are predators, for that matter. And so just saying, like, giving it a scale.
Thank you, Gwen. All right, this next question is from Megan. They're wondering about storytelling. Are you often preparing these stories ahead of time, or are you improvising them in the moment?
Both. So it's more there. Once you've been doing outreach on this topic for a while, or whatever your topic is, you see the same questions over and over and over. And so once you see what the common questions are, then you can start thinking about, how can I arrange my answer so it has a beginning, a middle, and end, or so that it is making comparisons between this insect and things that we do as people. And so that's really it. It's I also have the the advantage that I'm a professional writer, and so stories is kind of a thing that I do. But I wasn't always, and so that happened because of practice. And so the more that you do this activity of talking to people and listening to questions, yeah, it's the other thing you can do is think about books that you really enjoyed and recommend those books. And so I have a whole, there's a ton of really fun kids' books. One of them is Nora's Notebooks. There's an ant experiment in it, and it's a book about Nora, who likes ants and how she interacts with all her kids, but she will gain a huge amount of ant facts in it. So this is a middle school book. And so thinking about things that you have seen and just kind of sticking them in the back of your head so that you can come up with that.
Thanks for those tips. Okay, more questions. Sally's asking, what's the difference in communication tactics for educating people unfamiliar with / new to a topic versus people who hold misinformation about the topic as fact?
I think I honestly just let the misinformation go, because it's very difficult to start an interaction with someone, again, by saying that's wrong. What you can do is just kind of let it sail right over you and say, did you know? In something like, the Wi-Fi 3G thing. I've had some pretty weird conspiracy theories. And what I usually do is just, that hasn't been my experience. And let's talk about, and just redirect it to some other thing that I want to talk about. Like, did you know honeybees actually aren't native to North America? And so just like send them off in a different direction, because you really don't want to get sucked into an argument with anyone. And if it's way out there, so, the strongest thing I've ever said is that's really not been my experience and not what I see in the data. And then I just change the topic.
So we are on the hour, but we're going to go a little bit over to get through some of these great questions. So keep them coming. I lost my question. This rarely happens to me. All right, here we go. This was an anonymous person, but I really appreciate this question. Hopefully they're still here. But they would be interested to hear more about your approach to identifying the audience in your culture first approach.
Yeah, that is, sometimes you can and sometimes you can't. So when I'm working with agricultural audiences, it's generally a safe assumption that they're going to skew more conservative. And the other thing that I find helps a lot is what t-shirts people are wearing. And so if you walk into the room and half the audience is wearing some sort of nature-y t-shirt, like, okay, I know how to reach these people. I know kind of where they are. if I walk into an audience and they're wearing hunting t-shirts, people who hunt are very into conservation. Not so much environmentalism, but very interested in conservation. And so just kind of knowing the attitudes that you commonly find in large groups. At the science fiction convention, I mean, if somebody is dressed as a Klingon, that doesn't really tell me anything about them other than they like Klingons. Um, and so sometimes you don't know, and you just have to kind of work with the faces that people make as you're talking. And so if you say something and half the room goes, then that's a sign to change and sort of redirect and be like, okay, I see a lot of you making faces. Why? And it's really just the other thing you can do, and this is actually something Rachel and I were talking about, is talking to people before you start talking. So if it's a presentation, if you are in the audience and everybody's walking around, you can chit chat with them and find out a little bit about them. If it's tabling, then the organization that you're tabling for, they usually have an idea of what their audience is like and the ages that you're likely to get. And that's information I usually ask for in advance.
Yeah, sometimes faces can convey a lot.
They can, yes.
Okay, we have another question here. Robert's wondering, if you're presenting to an audience at a nature center or elsewhere, for example, should you avoid mentioning threats like climate change at all and just stick to non-threatening terms like extreme weather, or not even mention our environment?
I mean, I think that is two different questions. So the first one would be, well, two different answers, I guess would be a better way to put that. Again, I am very lucky because I am towards the end of my career. I'm established. I'm senior, and I also kind of don't care. And so I will just say climate change, and then if somebody challenges me on it, I'll just let it go. If you are a junior person or you are in a place where you're not that comfortable of your job, then yeah, it might be better to say extreme weather. Because the last thing you want is somebody getting mad enough to call your boss. And I think everybody can agree the weather is weird. That's something that is not hard to get people to agree on. And sometimes, so when I was working in Indiana, which is a very conservative state, I would usually say extreme weather and let someone else bring up climate change, because usually somebody would. And then that would give me kind of the opening. So it's a lot of it is your gut. You have a sense of who you're talking to and like we said, the faces that they're making, and whether, if you're talking and they're going, right. And they're giving back to you the positive feedback that we talked about, right. Then yeah, go for it. But if you're just not sure, yeah, and you can absolutely also imply climate change by saying, we have seen as things have gotten warmer, that these changes have happened. So I think it's all context dependent, which what isn't really not very helpful, but it is context dependent.
Thank you, Gwen. All right. Bailey is wondering, do you have any tips for telling stories and making connections between people and arthropods without crossing the line into too much anthropomorphism?
That's hard. That's hard. And so I think there is anthropomorphism that's okay and anthropomorphism that is not okay. So not okay anthropomorphism would be Jerry Seinfeld's B movie, which was terrible. And so, but saying that, calling an animal a mother, or talking about animals having fear, that's pretty mild. It's more not attributing thoughts to the animals. So, like this bug likes you. uh, it's I honestly don't worry about it that much, because unless I am saying something, the thing that is really important to me is to be non-coercive. And so not to say things that are demonstratively untrue. And not to, be like force people to do things they don't want to do. And so talking about I work with caterpillars a lot, because I have met one person that is terrified of caterpillars, but that's it. For most people, they're just kind of benign, squoogey little things. And so um, saying things like the caterpillar doesn't like it when you pull his legs, right? Um, that's not entirely an untrue statement. And especially for little kids, it's going to work a lot better than just saying, please don't pull the legs. Because most kids have learned, like, you don't hurt your friends. And I very often talk about the insects as my friends, because I want to get that idea that these are friends, right? They have a job to do, and they're doing things for us. That may not have been a satisfactory answer.
No, that's great. Yeah. Okay, moving on. Other questions. Jenny asks, what have you found to be the most effective form of mass public education? Social media, signage, programs?
Well, I don't have an answer for that, because we're also back to the issue of budget. Um, but because our media is so splintered right now, I can't tell you how often people will tell me about a show and I'm like, what? What's that on? And they're like, oh, it's on Tubi. And I'm like, what's Tubi? Um, okay, because I am an old, yes, but also because there are thousands and thousands of different channels and so many people putting media out to the world that it's almost impossible to figure out um, what's the best way. And I think one of the neatest places that I have seen working on that in a very systematic way is the Internet Observatory, and that is on the list. I don't know if you can pull that, the Narrative Observatory. I don't know if you can pull that link and stick it in the chat again, one of y'all. It's on the list of references that I had. They have looked at different audience segments, classified them by value systems, and then looked at what messages resonated most with them. And it's fascinating. It's also a project that took a lot of money and a lot of people and a lot of time. But finding a common place is really difficult. And so that's where working with others. So if you have a group that, okay, here's an example. In my work with science fiction conventions, I talk about Spider-Man. And if I were to try and give a talk about spiders, not that many people would show up. But if I give a talk that is the terrible truth about Spider-Man's anatomy at a science fiction convention, which is full of nerds, I am a nerd also, I can say that. Then I will get a full house. I had 300 people show up for that. And so because I had a connection to an established audience and I knew them and I knew what would resonate with them as a message, that let me have really in-depth conversations about spiders. And we got off Spider-Man pretty quickly, although definitely we had a lot of fun with that. And so that's a way to sort of take a connection with a group that has a specific demographic and then teach to that demographic in a specific way. But yeah, there's no one weird trick. I wish there was. My life and many people's lives would be so much easier. It'd be a lot easier.
Gwen, what was the title of that study? I want to make sure I'm putting the right one in the chat.
Let's see here.
Was it facilitators improve the learning experience of
Nope,
visitors?
It's the Narrative Observatory. It's a little farther down. So I think it's Narrative Observatory / climate.
Okay. All right, I will put it in the chat in a second. I'm going to hop to our next question. So we have time for just a couple more questions. This is from an anonymous participant. They're trying to join and volunteer at a community garden and want to ask if they can provide soil testing results and or if we'd be willing to have the soil tested. But some places have been really defensive and they are wondering how they should proceed.
I think you should just ask them. And if you do it as, if you'd like, I have the ability to do soil testing. And that could be additional information that you could share. And so if you start it with, if you'd like, as opposed to, I can do this. So you want to get their permission. And so asking for permission is one way to, yes, okay, we got the, if you get their permission and ask for permission, that actually shortcuts a lot of issues that people have, because otherwise they'll feel like you're trying, like if you come in and I've seen this happen in a lot of volunteer groups where a new person comes in and they're like, we can do this, we can do this, we can do this. And the members are like, oh, no, this is our thing. But by asking permission, or you could even say, would you guys be interested in doing this? So that's one way to kind of try and then if they say, no, we're not interested, you can say, just so that I know, and it'll help me be better at what I do, can you tell me a little bit more why you don't want to? And it might be that their answer is one that you can be like, oh, well, here, you can answer that. But a lot of this all boils down to finding out why people feel the way they feel. Because I wish that I could figure that out by just looking at them, but I cannot. And I don't think anybody can. And it's really hard to know what's happening in someone's head unless we ask them.
Very true. Okay, as Rachel mentioned, only time for a few more questions. So here's another situation example. Melissa asks, can you speak again to how to tackle the mosquito fogging conversations? Maybe provide some examples. That
is not my area of expertise. I am very sad that I missed the specific discussion of that. Was that earlier this week or last week by one of Xerces specialists? But what I usually say, so with that caveat, is that the data that I have seen suggests it does not work and it does a lot more harm than good. And if you really want to work on getting rid of mosquitoes, the place to start is standing water. And one of the biggest places that I see people miss is gutters. And pointing out, like you can clean your gutters, but your neighbors might not. And so if you really want to do something about mosquitoes, if you have an elderly neighbor, volunteer to clean out their gutters, because otherwise they will be the source of mosquitoes for the whole neighborhood. And thinking about toys. So a lot of times, like a little dump truck in the backyard from a kid that can hold water and just really small amounts of water. And you want to clean out your bird bath, but you want to do that for the birds too, right? It's healthier for the birds. And so just giving them some ideas about ways to protect them, but you could also do it as a feel, felt, found. Like, I totally get why you would feel like you need to control mosquitoes, because there's a real reason, there's a real threat. That is a real threat to your health and the family's threat. And I feel that, I have felt that same way every day when I am out in my backyard doing gardening and I get bitten. What I've found is, I protect myself with this and I do that and I make sure really. So the feel, felt, found is a great way to kind of start that conversation. But I think you also have to address that misting is not doing what you think it's doing. It's killing a lot of things that are not mosquitoes, and it's not really killing that many mosquitoes. It is, however, making a whole lot of money for people.
Thank you, Gwen. Yeah, the webinar will be repeated. Erin Anderson on our staff is going to talk about a mosquito spray study that they did. It's
Excellent.
Very interesting.
Fantastic.
Podcast will come out next month, but it's on April 17th. And I just put the link in the chat to register. So that'll be our next month's webinar. I'm very excited about it. So we're going to end here with this last question. And I really appreciate Ryan asking it, because I love these like action items and things that we can recommend people do, especially if it gets people outside and observing insects. But they are wondering if you have any apps for bug ID and information. They know of iNaturalist, but wondering if there were any other that you particularly liked.
I love iNaturalist. And if you didn't know, there is a companion to iNaturalist called Seek that is meant to be used mostly with younger kids or with people who are very privacy focused. And so Seek is kind of like Pokemon for bugs, where it tells you, it tells you where you are and like, can you find these bugs? And that one is really fun. And honestly, iNaturalist is really my favorite. I think it's the one that works the best. There are several other apps that are focused on specific groups. So there are, here, I'll look. So there are some invertebrate, macroinvertebrate ones. If you're working in water, there is one called Pocket Macros, I think. Hang on a second, it's got to download. Which is an absolutely amazing, come on, buddy, hurry up. Okay, fine. It's an absolutely amazing visual key. And it is from macroinvertebrates.org. And that is basically, they scanned images from all of the common macroinvertebrates in the United States and then have built that into this app. So if you're doing water monitoring, it's amazing because you get an actual picture. Sometimes you can rotate the picture to see exactly what you've caught in the river that you're monitoring or pond.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Gwen. This has been incredibly interesting. I've learned a lot. You have lots of love coming in on the chat. You have a lot of fans, which is very clear and awesome. So thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. Thank you for volunteering your time with us as an organization to do education. We're so lucky to have you. Thank you, Amber, for being here today as well and assisting. And yeah, thank you to our audience for coming. We hope to see you on next month's webinar, and do check out Bug Banter, Gwen's podcast that she did with us. I put the link in earlier. It was great and it was wonderful. So thank you so much. I hope you all have a wonderful day.